This is a story about a wild night in, I believe it was in 1990. It was around that time. I'm pretty sure that would have been when it was, probably in the late summer or early fall of 1990. This is a story about partying with Poison Idea. And so I was from November of 1988 until I believe June of 1992, for about 3.5 years. I was the bass player in a band in Seattle called the Derelicts, and we played hardcore punk, and we played with a lot of the bands of the time. We played some amazing shows. We played a lot in that 3.5 years, and we drove all over the Pacific Northwest. We only did 2 short tours, 2 West Coast tours in that time. No extensive touring, but we played a lot outside of Seattle, just wherever you could drive to in a day. We played a lot of weekend shows all over the Pacific Northwest, and we played a few times at the Satyricon in Portland. And this is the story of one of those nights in Portland. I may have this wrong. It's 35 years ago and a million beers ago. So I may have some of the details mixed up. But I believe that the night I'm talking about was when we opened for Helios Creed, one of the guys from Chrome, at the Satyricon. At the time, Helios Creed lived in Portland, and I believe that night his girlfriend was the bartender at Satyricon. Again, I may have some of these details mixed up, but as I recall, that was we were playing a show with Helios Creed at Satyricon, and his girlfriend was the bartender at the bar there. So anyone not familiar with the Satyricon, which is sadly no longer there, it was just a really dark, grungy, old school tavern bar in kind of on the outskirts of downtown Portland, on the edge of Chinatown, and a pretty sketchy part of town. I remember being down there several times, and if you would go walk around the neighborhood there after dark, it was it was maybe kind of a little bit of a dangerous part of Portland, or could be. Anyway, Satyricon, just a pretty small. I think in the room where the stage was, and you would play. If it was jam-packed full, there'd probably be less than 200 people. I don't know the capacity for sure, but maybe 150 to 180 people max. Maybe less, I don't know. It wasn't that large of a room. But so yeah, I mean, I would have been in the fall. I would have turned 27 in November of 1990. So this would have been probably a couple months before that. So I was 26 years old. So some of the events I'm about to describe may be seen as questionable behavior for a responsible adult. But it was 35 years ago. I was 26. I was in a punk band in Seattle at the time. It was 1990, and we were having fun playing music. And so anyway, yeah, we would have driven to Portland. I'm usually in the early part of my tenure in that band. We always used my Volkswagen bus. I had a green and white Volkswagen bus at the time, and that's what we used to load our gear and go play shows and drive all over the place. But for some reason, on this weekend that I'm talking about, we went to Portland in Neil, our guitar player's. It was a mid-60s Plymouth Fury. I think it was a 1966 Plymouth Fury. And I don't remember why we had to go in Neil's car, but I do remember that that was the vehicle we were in on this trip. So that would have meant that we didn't take all our gear. We probably would have taken the guitar and the bass, and probably our heads, but no speaker cabinets, and we must have just borrowed cabinets and drums from one of the other bands on the bill. I don't remember the details, but I do remember that that was the car, or that was the vehicle we were in for this trip, for whatever reason. So, yeah, typically, we would drive to Portland. We would probably leave around 1 or so, and leave Seattle, drive to Portland, maybe get there at 4 or 5, and I think typically I don't remember the details of this specific trip that well, except for some of them, which I'm going to tell the story of. But yeah, we would have just driven to Portland, gone straight to the club, and unloaded our gear, put it inside the club, and then just driven around Portland and gone to go eat somewhere. We might have gone to Escape from New York for pizza or something like that. And then we would go probably around 6 or 7 p.m. We'd be back at the club and basically just sit there at Satyricon for 3 or 4 hours until it was time to play. So that was our life at the time. Sitting in a bar in downtown Portland for 3 or 4 hours, drinking beer and listening to music. They probably would have been playing, a bunch of Northwest bands of the time, or like Jane's Addiction and Motorhead and whatever. They would have a loud sound system, and we would be sitting there drinking beer and playing music while the club fills up with people coming to the show. And so yeah, we would play the show, and we were opening for Helios Creed, so we probably were the second or third band on the bill. We played before the headliner, and then Helios Creed played after us, and then we would load out to get our gear and leave. And sometimes on a trip like this, we would have a place to stay. We would have somebody that we knew in Portland that we had figured out that we were going to sleep at their house. And on this trip, I remember we didn't have a place lined up. We didn't know what we were going to do or where we were going to stay. And so we were, hanging out at Satyricon, drinking beer and listening to music, and getting ready to play, and like watching the bands that were playing before us and stuff. And at some point somebody said, "Hey, the guys from Poison Idea are here. They're here to see you guys play," and which was really exciting to all 4 members of the Derelicts, myself included. Were huge Poison Idea fans. They were like, we looked up to them. Their album Feel the Darkness had come out earlier that year, and I had gotten it when it came out and had listened to it hundreds of times by then. I knew that album, front to back, and loved it. it was one of my favorite albums at the time, and it was something that we listened to a lot when we were on long drives, and everyone in the band, kind of worshipped Poison Idea. They were the big boys, literally and figuratively, so we were excited. We were like, okay, we're gonna fucking rock this, we're gonna tear some shit up. I mean, we always were like that, but just the idea that the members of Poison Idea were in the audience was really exciting to us at the time. And so anyway, we played, and then Helios Creed played, and then we were loading our stuff out, and I guess Tom, Pig Champion, just came over and started talking to us, and after the show, and he was very, he very appreciative of our performance. He was like, that was really good. You guys are a great band, and we were in awe. We were starstruck that Pig Champion liked our band. And we're just loading our stuff out and whatnot, and he's like, well, where are you guys going? Do you have a place to stay, or what are you doing? And we're like, we don't know, maybe we'll just drive back to Seattle. And which is ridiculous. We had been, each of us had probably had 10 or 12 beers by that time, amongst other things. Some members of the band would have also been doing other harder drugs at the time, which I never got into, but anyway, so we didn't know where we were going, and Tom was like, well, come on, let's party, come on over to my house, and I got a place over here, and we got some wine, and we'll party. So we're like, okay, fuck yeah, let's party with Poison Idea. And we followed Tom to his house. I'm sure we picked up probably a half rack of Black Label or Animal beer or something along the way. And as I recall, and again, my details are sketchy because I was drinking heavily, and this was 35 years ago. So, but as I recall, Tom's house was kind of in an odd, it was a proper house, but it was not in a residential neighborhood like where there was a lot of other houses. It was kind of in a weird industrial neighborhood where there was like train tracks and warehouses, and like machine shops, and then the odd house here and there. I'm not sure, it was a part of Portland that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know exactly where it was, but that's my memory of the landscape. It was kind of an industrial neighborhood. It's sort of off a little bit on the edge of town, sort of, and he didn't have other houses right next door or anything. So yeah, we get to Pig Champion's house, and they had their stuff set up. They guess just rehearsed right there in the living room at his house. So Poison Idea's equipment, drum set and amps and everything, were all just set up in the corner. And it's just an old house, probably like an old 2-bedroom house in Portland. And he had like dirty dishes and stuff in the sink, and a couple couches in the living room where they had their gear set up, and he had bookshelves, and so Tom Pig Champion was, I guess, a really literate guy and an avid reader, and he kind of went into it. He kind of put on a performance for us when we all got back to his house, and he was drinking wine, and I think he grabbed like a Bukowski or some book of poetry, and was like reading poetry aloud and drinking wine. And this guy is like 400 pounds, just a gigantic, obese man with long, dirty hair and wearing like just a dirty old T-shirt. But he had this very grand manner of speaking and a very rich, sonorous voice. And yeah, he was sort of regaling us with his take on various poets and reading poetry aloud to everyone in the room. There was us. Actually, Dwayne, our singer, wasn't there. It was me and Neil, our guitar player, and Rick, our drummer. And Dwayne had probably gone off on his endless search for opiates. But so yeah, and then there was like a few other people, just random people from the show who had tagged along to come to Tom's house and drink and party and hang out. And at some point, Tom whips out a bag of Coke and he's like, "Anybody want to do a line of Coke? Let's do it up." And so we all did some cocaine, and this is, I would have had probably 10 beers before this and was still having more. We got beer along the way, and but anyway, yeah, we all did a couple lines, and then we ended up jamming. And this is kind of a trip because I'm not a drummer. I've played drums a little bit, and I enjoy it, but I don't know how to play drums well, by a long shot. And but we ended up jamming. I jammed with Tom, Pig Champion, him playing guitar, me playing drums, and I don't think Neil jammed with us, but someone else was playing bass. Anyway, yeah, I played the Slayer Hippies drum set and jammed with Pig Champion on Coke at 3 a.m. at his house in the middle of some weird industrial neighborhood. And so we did that, and and like the night went on, and we were all drinking, and there was one girl there. It was like a bunch of dudes and this one pretty girl, and I didn't know who she was. I don't know if I ever even knew her name. But at some point, she got kind of creeped out by Neil, our guitar player, and Neil could when he was in the wee hours of after a long night of heavy drinking and a couple lines of Coke, he could be a little predatory, and I had seen that before. Anyway, this girl latched onto me as her savior, and because I was kind of like I was the nice guy in the band. I was sort of the most sort of normal, least fucked up one in the band, and somehow or other, I guess Neil didn't want to drive. He knew better than that, and this girl needed to get somewhere. She needed to leave, and she wanted a ride, and somehow Neil gave me the keys to his car. So I get in Neil's Plymouth Fury with this girl that I didn't know, and this would have been, I remember it was getting light out, so it would have been around dawn, probably 4:30 in the morning or something by this time. And yeah, I kind of vaguely remember sort of driving through the outskirts of Portland in Neil's '66 Plymouth Fury with this pretty girl, kind of talking to me about how she had to get out of there and everything. And I guess she just needed a ride somewhere, and I just dropped her off somewhere, and then drove back to Tom's house. And everyone's still up, you know, cocaine's flowing, and there's still beer and wine, and it's light out by now. It's probably 5 a.m., 5 or 6. And Mondo, the guy that was playing lead guitar in Poison Idea at the time, came by and scored a bag of Coke from Tom. And again, this is like early in the morning on a Sunday morning. And he was there for 5 minutes, scored and left. And we're just hanging out and drinking beer and stuff. And getting to know Tom, because he was very engaging. The whole time he was really, he was always sort of talking to the group as a sort of an elder sage of punk rock and underground poetry and whatever he was talking about. But he would, he really commanded the room, and went on and on about the stuff that he was into, which was fascinating to us. He was a hero to us at the time, you know, and we were, you know, it was it was early in the morning after an all-night drinking and Coke binge. But yeah, I got to jam with Pig Champion, and in the middle of the night in his living room, and then at some point a little later in the morning, we decided to go eat, and Tom took us as like an entourage. There was probably 8 people, and we went to a Chinese restaurant that was in this weird industrial neighborhood that he lived in, a place fairly close to his house. We all got in our cars and went there, and you know, the people at the restaurant knew Tom. They were like, "Oh, do you want your usual table?" And he kind of came in and took over he kind of commanded the room, and same as he had been doing at his house. And they gave us this big table, and Tom was like, "Let me order for you guys," and he ordered just this mountain of Chinese food. And once again, you know, for like an hour we sat there and at this big round table in the middle of this Chinese restaurant on a Sunday morning, and Tom's sitting there with a can of beer and a mountain of Chinese food, and you know, just going on and on about all of the stuff that he knows about in poetry and music, and just a really interesting character. And so anyway, we finished breakfast, Chinese breakfast, and went back to Tom's house, and they were, as it turned out, Poison Idea was leaving later that day to go on tour in Europe. And Tom was like, "Yeah, the guys are coming over, we're going to run the set, and then we're going to pack up and get ready to go to Europe." And so we're just hanging out. We're like, we've been there all night, drinking beer and just hanging out, listening to music and whatnot, jamming. Pretty soon the guys come over, Slayer Hippie, Mondo, I believe it was Myrtle Tickner was playing bass, and we're just sitting on the couch at Pig Champion's house, and the guys come over, and their stuff is just set up there in the corner of the living room, and they, you know, Steve, Slayer Hippie, just sits down, tunes up his drums for a minute, and Tom grabs his Ibanez Iceman with the sawed-off horn, and he sits down in a chair to play guitar. I think Mondo was playing a Les Paul and a Marshall half stack. Tom was playing a Marshall half stack with his Iceman, and I believe the bass amp was a Gallion Kruger, just the typical GK bass amp of the time, probably a 215 cabinet, and this giant, probably 9-piece drum set, and they just turned on their amps, and Tom's like, all right, let's run the set. And we're just sitting there on the couch, and they launched into Feel the Darkness. They basically played the album Feel the Darkness from start to finish. Jerry wasn't there. There was no vocals. This was a instrumental run through of the set, and like I said, this was their new album. To me, was one of my favorite albums at the time. I had listened to it 100 times, and I knew it front to back, note for note. And yeah, they just came into the room and turned on their amps, and Tom's like, all right, let's run the set. They launched into Plastic Bomb, and I'm sitting 10 feet away on the couch, just, I mean, it was astounding. They sounded so good. I mean, if you're familiar with that album, if you know what the guitars and the drums and the bass and everything on that album sound like, they sounded exactly like that, except I was sitting in the room with them playing it live in front of me. And it was one of the greatest. I've seen thousands of shows. I've played shows with some famous bands and lots of fantastic musicians, and this was one of the greatest musical performances I've ever personally witnessed. And just being sitting on the couch, being in the room with Poison Idea, performing Feel the Darkness start to finish live in front of me, was astounding. I was just awe-stricken. I was completely blown away. My brain melted that day. And yeah, they played the set, played the album pretty much, and started packing up their stuff, and we just got in the car and drove back to Seattle. And as fucked up as I was at the time, I remember parts of that night and that Sunday morning. Now 35 years later, it's still I remember that like just one of the best musical performances I've ever been present for. It was truly astounding. So yeah, like I said, I may have some details mixed up or wrong, remembered wrong or whatever. And if anybody was around at the time or was at that show at Satyricon or knows if I've got the lineup wrong or the date wrong, but I'm pretty sure it would have been late summer or in the fall of 1990. And so that's my story of partying with Poison Idea and Tom Pig Champion.